Alright, so originally I was going to react as I watched the episode, but that didn't work out. So, let me explain again what I'm doing. So, I'm basically going to be rewatching Avatar The Last Airbender again and reacting to the episodes. Originally, I was going to react to them while I'm watching, but since that's not going to work out, I'm just going to do a little thing afterwards. Now, the first thing is, so we're in book 1, Water, and this is chapter 1, The Boy and the Iceberg. And so the first thing I noticed was the fact that the introduction to the series is very different from the usual introduction from when I watched it however long ago. So it took me a moment to figure out why, but thought about it and it made sense because honestly, this was the very first episode to ever air, so which means Katara has to give us the background to what's going on overall and why this is all happening, sort of. I mean, there's more to it, of course, that we find out throughout the series, but she has to give us at least the basics of what's going on. And she doesn't know Aang yet, because the second part of the introduction that's missing was the part about Aang. And she doesn't know him yet, because he's the boy in the iceberg. Now, first, I have to say, I always love the fact that the series starts essentially with Katara calling out her brother Sokka, who I love his sarcasm and his skepticism and all that, but oh my god, he was such an ass in the beginning. He does improve through the series, but still. And so Katara's like just really mad, and it's hilarious. At the same time, it's kind of scary, and it's just kind of nice to see them so young without so much worries as they get in future episodes. So yeah, we start with Katara basically yelling at her brother for perfectly good reasons, and essentially breaking apart an iceberg, which leads to the iceberg that Aang is in to resurface, essentially. Little thing that always kind of bugged me is that how did it stay underwater for so long? I don't know. It just it's ice and it's mostly filled with air, so it should float. But no, he's underwater. Was that iceberg that Katara broke the thing trapping the iceberg he was in still underwater or something? And then if her breaking it apart caused his iceberg to float up to the top finally? I don't know. I honestly don't. And it's confusing me a little bit. But oh well. Anyways, then Aang gets released, and huge light flies up, and we get introduced to Zuko and Uncle Iroh, which both are amazing characters. But Zuko, so much anger in the beginning. You always forget that, especially towards the end, because he's kind of grown into himself by the end of the series, and he has a lot of anger at this point. And his relationship with Iroh is so much different than what it ends with. Considering the fact that Iroh doesn't call him Zuko, he calls him Prince Zuko, as if it's almost as if he's reassuring Zuko that even though his father has kind of basically disowned him, which, spoiler alert, sorry, for those who haven't seen the show yet, he's acknowledging the fact that he's still a prince, and it's amazing. And then there's also I love the foreshadowing that the animators have put in. It's not obvious, but looking back at it now and seeing the show now, it's very obvious because the tiles that Iroh is playing with at those moments, the tile he's holding in his hand in that scene has the air nomad symbol on it, which foreshadowing, duh. Anyways, so then we get them going into back to Sokka and Katara finding Aang. And oh my god, Aang is such a dork. I mean, he stays a dork, but he is a very big dork at the beginning. Yet at the same time, you get hints of the guilt he's carrying. Just little bit of hints throughout his introduction. I mean, first of all, the first thing he asks is if Katara wants to go penguin sledding with him, which is quite frankly hilarious. And I mean, Sokka's totally like very, very skeptical and very distrusting of Aang, which is interesting to see that dynamic between them at the beginning. And I have no idea. Did I just pause it? Well, I'm gonna start what I was saying again. It's very interesting to see that dynamic between Sokka and Aang at the very beginning of this series, where Sokka doesn't trust Aang at all because A, he's an outsider, and B, why should he trust him? He has no reason to believe anything Aang says to him, no matter who Aang might be. He doesn't know anything about this kid who'd come into their lives, and it's shown easily in his interactions with him. And so they go to the village, and I just love how much research the animators put into creating the cultures of each of the nations, because it's very, very fascinating, and I love it. And so, yeah, we get to the point where um, Aang is introduced to the village. They're all very distrusting and afraid, and it shows that war has taken a toll on them. But then at the same time, you get to see that the kids aren't as distrusting as the adults, because at the same time, you can see that they've been protected by the adults, and it's quite honestly really interesting to see. And then of course we have Sokka trying to train the younger boys, which is kind of sad. Also, Gran got introduced to us, and I honestly love Gran. She was probably a character that if we had seen more of would have been hilarious, but unfortunately we don't see much more of her. And I mean, I love her deadpanness and all that, so we can see where you can sort of see where Sokka will end up kind of gets his sense of humor from, just by those few things that Gran says in that very first episode. And so no, Sokka is getting frustrated with Aang after a point. Like, I mean, he was already kind of frustrated, but it's getting worse for him because Aang is so immature, and it bugs Sokka because him and Katara have been forced to mature after, well, reasons, especially because their father has left for war and they don't have a mother. And again, there's spoilers to what happens to their mother, so I won't say any more about her. But it's fascinating, especially when later when Aang and Katara do go penguin sledding, she says, "I haven't done this since I was a kid." She's still a kid, and the fact that she doesn't consider herself one is just kind of sad. And I mean, then we get to see Zuko a few times being very angry. He has just so much anger. He's impatient and just very, very angry, and it's kind of sad to see him like that, considering how we know what he becomes. And I don't know, it's just sad. But anyways, and then I mean, Iroh's being Iroh, especially like we get to see some of his strictness from then. We see that he does have a backbone. He's not as much of a pushover as you would think from his character, especially in the latter of the series. I can't speak, obviously, but no, he's very rigid in a way, like not in a bad way. He's not afraid to scold Zuko. He treats Zuko as a human being almost, and respect for him. So much respect for Iroh. And then we get Aang finally figuring out that he's been in that iceberg for over 100 years. And then we also get to know his age. He was 12 years old when this all started. He was 12 years old, spent 100 years in that iceberg, because he calls himself a 112-year-old man. So that tells us how old he really is. And just because he's actually 112 does not make him mentally 112. Mentally, he's definitely only 12 years old because he never matured past that. And it's important to remember as the series goes on, because people will expect so much of him because he's supposedly over 100, but he's not at the same time. And it's just really, really important to make that distinction now. And so, no, they explore that ship, which I'm fairly certain that ship is probably haunted. They don't see any ghosts because that would have been kind of an irritation to actually animate, but that ship is totally haunted. And so, no, Aang and Katara explore it. Stupid of them. Well, mostly Aang, but at the same time, Katara already knew what the problem was for exploring that, yet she did it anyway, so. They're kids. I give them that. They're kids. They don't sometimes understand the consequences. Not that I do either, but anyways, so no, they activate that booby trap, they let out that flare, so they get out of there as fast as they can, and then Zuko finds out exactly where he is, and and then that's where the episode ends, and that's all I have to say.